Derbyshire, May 1818. The morning rain fell against the windows of Ravenscross Manor with a persistence that matched the knot of anxiety tightening in Penelope Margaret Crane's chest. She stood in the entrance hall, her worn traveling cloak still damp despite the footman's attempt to shake off the excess water, and wondered if accepting this position had been desperation or folly. At 25 years of age, Penelope comprehended precisely what society decreed of women in her circumstances. The daughter of a disgraced solicitor who had died owing more money than 3 lifetimes could repay. Educated far beyond her station in a French convent for 16 years, speaking 7 languages with the fluency of a native, yet possessing not a single letter of reference that any respectable household would accept. The answer to why she stood here, trembling slightly in the cold grandeur of this ancient manor, was simple and terrible. She had no choice whatsoever. If stories of love that triumph over society's cruelest judgments move your heart, subscribe now and join us on this journey. You will not want to miss what happens next. The heavy oak door to the study opened with a sound like judgment itself. A tall figure emerged, backlit by the gray morning light filtering through the windows behind him. Julian Frederick Whitmore, Viscount Ashcroft, stopped 3 paces from her, his expression carved from the same unyielding stone as the manor's ancient walls. He was older than she had expected. 36, perhaps, with dark hair graying at the temples and lines around his eyes that spoke of grief worn like armor. His evening clothes proclaimed he had not yet been to bed, and the faint scent of brandy confirmed her suspicion. "Miss Crane," he said, his voice flat and cold as winter iron, "the agency made me apprised that you profess a command of 6 languages. How singularly convenient for a woman in your particular circumstances." Penelope felt the familiar, scalding shame rise in her throat, but 16 years in a convent had taught her discipline, if nothing else. She met his gaze directly, her spine straight, despite the weight of exhaustion and despair. "7 languages, my lord," she replied, her voice steady. "French, Italian, German, Latin, Greek, Hebrew, and English." The agency was working from incomplete information. The Viscount's eyes narrowed. For a long moment, he simply stared at her, and she could see the calculation behind his cold assessment. Finally, he laughed, though the sound held no warmth whatsoever. "You expect me to believe that a woman whose father died in disgrace, who arrives at my door without proper references, somehow acquired expertise in 7 languages?" He turned away dismissively. "I may be desperate for a governess, Miss Crane, but I am not a fool." The words should have broken her. 3 months ago they might have, but poverty and grief had burned away everything soft in Penelope, leaving behind something harder and more valuable, a resolve of iron. "I do not think you a fool, my lord," she said quietly. "I judge you a man who has forgotten what kindness is. But that does not change the reality of my qualifications, nor does it alter the fact that you have dismissed 17 governesses in 2 years and your children remain untaught." The silence that followed hung heavy, dangerous. Lord Ashcroft turned slowly, his expression unreadable. The butler, still standing near the door, gasped audibly at her audacity. "How dare you?" the Viscount said softly, each word precise and cutting. "You know nothing of my children or my household. I know you are interviewing governesses at dawn because you have exhausted your recourse," Penelope replied. "I know the agency was reluctant to send me here despite my qualifications because of your reputation as an impossible employer. And I know that whatever tragedy has hardened your heart, your children are paying the price for it." For a moment, she thought he would order her removed immediately. His jaw tightened, and his hands clenched at his sides, the only sign of the violent constraint he exercised. But something flickered behind his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or the ghost of shame. "You will address me with proper respect," he said finally, "or this interview is concluded." With respect, my lord, Penelope amended, though her tone remained steady. I apologize for my directness, but I will not apologize for speaking truth. You may dismiss me if you wish. I have nowhere else to go. But before you do, perhaps you might consider allowing me to meet your children. The request resonated between them, heavy with consequence. Lord Ashcroft studied her with an intensity that made her want to look away. But she held his gaze. She had lost everything. Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford, but dignity still remained. Very well, he said abruptly. You will have 1 week. If my children show no improvement, or if you prove to be as incompetent as your circumstances suggest, you will be dismissed without reference or payment. Is that clear? Perfectly clear, my lord. Mrs. Reynolds will show you to the schoolroom. He turned back toward his study, then paused. And Miss Crane, the children are not your concern beyond their education. You will maintain appropriate boundaries at all times. I will not have another governess attempting to ingratiate herself into this family's affairs. The door closed behind him with decisive finality. Penelope released a breath she had not realized she was holding. The housekeeper, Mrs. Reynolds, a woman of perhaps 50 years with kind eyes and a worried expression, stepped forward. This way, miss, she said gently. I should warn you about the young masters and Miss Sophie before you meet them. They climbed the grand staircase, their footsteps muffled by thick carpet. Portraits of stern ancestors watched their progress with painted disapproval. Mrs. Reynolds spoke in low tones as they walked. The eldest is Master Thomas, 14 years old and sharp as his father, but terrified of making mistakes. Drives himself to exhaustion, trying to be perfect. She paused on the landing. His lordship is very strict with the boy, expects excellence in everything. And the others? Penelope prompted. Miss Sophie is 11, sweet child, but she hides her true interests, loves plants and gardens, but his lordship forbids such pursuits as unsuitable for a lady of her station. Mrs. Reynolds's expression grew more troubled. And then there is Master Henry, 8 years old and has not spoken a single word since his mother died 5 years ago. Penelope stopped walking. Not a word? In 5 years? Not one. Doctors have examined him and found nothing physically wrong. He simply chooses silence. The housekeeper's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Or perhaps he has nothing worth saying in this house of grief. They reached a door at the end of a long corridor. Mrs. Reynolds knocked once, then opened it to reveal a large, cold room with high windows and sparse furnishings. 3 children sat at separate desks, each bent over their work in complete silence. The eldest boy looked up first. Thomas Whitmore had his father's dark hair and sharp features, but his eyes held a wariness that no child should possess. He stood immediately, his posture military straight. You must be the new governess, he said formally. I am Thomas Whitmore. This is my sister Sophie and my brother Henry. Sophie rose as well, a pretty child with auburn hair and her father's gray eyes. She curtsied politely, but Penelope noticed how her hands were stained green, as if she had been handling plants recently and scrubbed hastily to hide the evidence. The youngest child, Henry, remained seated. He was small for 8 years old, with soft brown curls and a face that might have been angelic, if not for the profound sadness in his eyes. He looked at Penelope briefly, then returned his attention to the slate before him, where he had been writing something in careful letters. Good morning, Penelope said, moving into the room. My name is Miss Penelope Crane, and I am very pleased to meet all of you. Thomas exchanged glances with his sister. Clearly, they had learned to be suspicious of new governesses. 17 in 2 years meant 17 failures, 17 departures. Why should she be different? Penelope set her small bag on the desk at the front of the room and removed her damp cloak. She wore a simple gray dress, appropriate for her position, but well made, one of the last remnants of her former life, carefully maintained. I understand you have had many governesses, she said calmly, and I understand that you may be wondering how long I will remain. I cannot promise you permanence, but I can promise you this. While I am here, I will teach you honestly, treat you fairly, and never punish you for asking questions or making honest mistakes." Sophie's eyes widened slightly. Thomas's rigid posture relaxed by perhaps an inch. Henry continued writing on his slate, but Penelope noticed his hand had stilled, as if he were listening intently despite his lack of response. "Now then," Penelope continued, "suppose we begin with something simple. Thomas, would you tell me what subjects you have been studying?" The boy straightened again, clearly accustomed to recitation. Latin grammar, Greek translation, mathematics through calculus, English composition, history of the Roman Empire, and natural philosophy. "Impressive," Penelope said honestly. "And do you enjoy these subjects?" The question seemed to confuse him. "Enjoyment is not of consequence, Miss Crane. Father says education is duty, not pleasure." "I see. And what would you study if enjoyment were relevant?" Thomas hesitated, a flash of longing crossing his features before he suppressed it. "Literature," he said finally, so quietly she almost did not hear. "Poetry and novels. But Father says such things are frivolous wastes of time." Penelope moved to Sophie's desk. "And you, Miss Sophie, what are you studying?" "Embroidery, watercolors, French conversation, pianoforte, and deportment," Sophie recited. "Everything necessary for a proper lady." "And if you could study anything at all?" Sophie bit her lip, glancing toward the door as if expecting her father to burst through at any moment. "Botany," she whispered. "I want to understand how plants grow and why some thrive while others fail. I have been keeping secret notes, but Father would be very angry if he knew." Penelope nodded thoughtfully, then approached Henry's desk. The boy had written something on his slate in neat, careful letters. She read it silently. "I can write words, but I cannot say them. Sometimes silence is safer than speaking." Her heart contracted with sudden, fierce compassion. This child had learned that words could bring pain, so he had chosen the safety of silence. What had happened in this house to teach such a terrible lesson? She knelt beside his desk, bringing herself to his eye level. "Henry," she said gently, "would you like to show me what else you can write?" The boy studied her face for a long moment, as if searching for something. Then, slowly, he nodded and began writing again. The letters formed carefully across the slate. "My mother used to read to us every night. She loved stories about knights and dragons." Penelope felt tears prick her eyes, but refused to let them fall. "Your mother sounds like she was a wonderful woman," she said softly. "Would you like me to read to you sometime?" Henry nodded again, and this time, something like hope flickered in his eyes. The morning passed in careful observation. Penelope listened more than she taught, asking questions and making mental notes. Thomas was brilliant, but terrified of imperfection. Sophie was curious and bright, but had learned to hide her true interests. Henry communicated entirely through his slate, writing eloquent sentences that revealed a thoughtful, sensitive nature trapped in self-imposed silence. By noon, when Mrs. Reynolds arrived to take the children to their midday meal, Penelope had begun to understand the challenge before her. These were not undisciplined or unintelligent children. They were children who had learned to bury their true selves to avoid disappointing their grieving, exacting father. She ate alone in the schoolroom, a simple meal of bread and cold meat. Through the window, she could see the gardens below, gray and dripping under continued rain. A figure moved among the hedges. Sophie, walking quickly despite the weather, her arms full of something green. Penelope considered calling out to stop her, then decided against it. The child needed space to breathe, even if it meant bending rules slightly. Instead, she used the time to organize her thoughts and plan lessons that might reach these wounded children. When they returned, damp and subdued, Penelope made a decision that would either secure her position or destroy it entirely. "Thomas," she said, "I want you to spend the next hour writing. Not an essay or composition, but whatever words come to your mind. Poetry, story, or simply thoughts. Write without worrying about perfection." The boy stared at her. "Father requires proper academic work." "I am your teacher, and I am assigning this work," Penelope replied firmly. "Sophie, I want you to draw me a plant. Any plant you choose, but draw it with as much detail as you can manage. Label its parts, if you know them." Sophie's face lit with sudden joy before she remembered to hide it. "Truly?" "Truly. And Henry?" She turned to the youngest child. "I want you to write me a story on your slate. Any story you like. About knights and dragons, perhaps." For the first time since she had arrived, all three children seemed to breathe properly. Thomas pulled out paper with trembling hands. Sophie selected her pencils with careful precision. Henry bent over his slate with an expression approaching happiness. Penelope settled at the front desk to read, keeping watch over them but allowing space for their work. The silence in the room transformed from oppressive to peaceful. The only sounds were pencil on paper, chalk on slate, and the steady rhythm of rain against glass. It was in this scene that Lord Ashcroft found them 2 hours later. The door opened without warning. All three children froze, their expressions shifting instantly to guilty fear. The Viscount stood in the doorway, still in his mourning clothes, his face a mask of cold disapproval. "Miss Crane," he said, his voice cutting through the peaceful atmosphere like a blade. "Might I inquire what academic discipline you are currently teaching my children?" Penelope rose calmly, though her heart raced. "Creative expression through writing and art, my lord, both valuable skills for their development." "I see." He moved into the room, his gaze sweeping across the desks. "Thomas, show me what you have written." The boy's hands shook as he held up the paper. Lord Ashcroft took it, read for a moment. Then his expression hardened further. "Poetry," he said flatly. "You are 14 years old, preparing for university, and your governess has you writing poetry." "My lord," Penelope began, but he cut her off with a raised hand. "And you, Sophie, drawing flowers when you should be practicing proper watercolor technique or learning needlework." "Father, I can explain," Sophie started, her voice small. Silence. He looked at Henry's slate, read the story written there, and something flickered across his face. Pain, perhaps, or the ghost of memory. "This is unacceptable." "With respect, my lord," Penelope said, stepping forward. "Your children are intelligent and capable. But they have been taught to fear their own interests and suppress their natural curiosity. That is not education. That is imprisonment." The room fell into a profound, breathless silence. Even the rain seemed to pause. Lord Ashcroft turned slowly to face her, and the fury in his eyes should have made her retreat. But Penelope had already lost everything. What more could he take? "You have been here less than 1 day," he said, each word precisely measured. "And you presume to lecture me on how to raise my own children." "I presume to do the job you hired me for," she replied. "Teaching, which requires understanding not just what your children need to learn, but who they are as individuals. They are Whitmores," he snapped. "That is who they are, and they will be educated accordingly. They are also human beings with thoughts and feelings and interests of their own." Penelope's voice remained steady despite the pounding of her heart. "Thomas wishes to study literature. Sophie is fascinated by botany. Henry has stories inside him that deserve to be heard, even if he cannot yet speak them aloud." "How dare you?" Lord Ashcroft said softly, dangerously. "You know nothing of what these children require. I know they are terrified of disappointing you. I know they have learned to hide their true selves because honesty brings criticism rather than support. And I know that in trying to make them perfect, you are making them miserable." The Viscount took a step toward her, and for a moment she thought he might actually strike her. But instead, he spoke in a voice so cold it burned. "You are dismissed, Miss Crane. Pack your belongings and leave this house immediately." "Father, no!" Sophie cried out. "Please, sir," Thomas added, his voice breaking. "She was only trying to help." Henry had dropped his slate. It lay on the floor between them, the story still visible in careful chalk letters. The boy looked from his father to Penelope with wide, desperate eyes. "I said silence," Lord Ashcroft commanded. "All of you, return to your regular studies immediately." Penelope felt something crack inside her chest. Not for herself, but for these children who had briefly hoped for something different. She bent to retrieve her cloak, moving slowly so no one would see how her hands trembled. "I apologize for overstepping, my lord," she said quietly. "You are quite right. I know nothing of your family or what you require." She walked to the door, pausing only briefly to look back at the 3 children sitting frozen at their desks. Thomas had tears in his eyes. Sophie clutched her drawing. Henry stared at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. "I am sorry," she told them softly. "I wish you all the very best." The corridor outside seemed impossibly long. Mrs. Reynolds stood near the stairs, her expression stricken. She had clearly heard everything. "Miss Crane," she began. "It is quite all right," Penelope interrupted gently. "I knew this was likely. A woman in my circumstances cannot afford to speak truth." "It is not all right," the housekeeper replied firmly. "Those children need someone exactly like you, but his lordship has been like this since Lady Margaret died. Closed off and cruel, thinking strictness will protect them from loss." Penelope nodded, though speaking was difficult past the tightness in her throat. She had nowhere to go. No money, no references, no prospects. The coaching inn where she had stayed last night would not extend further credit. By nightfall, she would be sleeping in a ditch somewhere along the road. But she had done what was right. That would have to be enough. She was halfway down the grand staircase when she heard footsteps running behind her. Henry appeared at the top of the stairs, his small face flushed with effort. He held his slate clutched against his chest. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. Then the boy raised his slate so she could read what he had written. "Please do not go. You are the first person who listened." The tears came then, despite all her efforts to prevent them. Penelope climbed back up the stairs and knelt before the child, ignoring propriety and position. "I have to go," she whispered. "Your father has dismissed me. But I want you to remember something, Henry. Your silence does not make you less valuable. Your words, whether written or spoken, matter. Do not let anyone convince you otherwise." The boy dropped his slate. His arms went around her neck in a fierce embrace that nearly undid her completely. She held him for a moment, feeling his small body shake with silent sobs, then gently disentangled herself. "Be brave," she told him. "All of you. Be braver than the world expects." She descended the stairs quickly, before she could change her mind or break down entirely. The entrance hall felt even colder than it had that morning. The butler opened the door for her wordlessly, his expression sympathetic but helpless. The rain had intensified. Within moments of stepping outside, Penelope was soaked through. She walked toward the main road, her small bag growing heavier with each step. Behind her, Ravencross Manor stood gray and imposing against the stormy sky, full of wounded people who would continue wounding each other because grief had taught them nothing else. She made it perhaps a quarter mile before exhaustion and despair forced her to stop. A stone wall provided minimal shelter from the rain. She sat heavily, no longer caring about propriety or appearance. Let the rain fall. Let the world see her failure. She had nothing left to lose. It was there, huddled against the wall like a beggar, that the Viscount's carriage found her an hour later. The vehicle stopped directly in front of her. The door opened, and Lord Ashcroft himself stepped out into the rain, his expression unreadable. "Get in," he said. Penelope stared at him. "My lord, you dismissed me." I am perfectly apprised of what I spoke. Get in the carriage, Miss Crane. We need to talk, and I will not conduct this conversation in a downpour. Too tired to argue, she allowed him to help her into the warm, dry interior. He followed, closing the door behind them. The carriage did not move. They sat in silence for a long moment while rain drummed on the roof. "My son embraced you," Lord Ashcroft said finally. "Henry, who has not willingly touched another person since his mother died, put his arms around you without hesitation." Penelope said nothing. What response could possibly be adequate? "And my daughter asked me, with tears in her eyes, if I truly believed that her interest in plants made her less of a lady." He looked out the window, his profile stark against the gray light. "While my eldest son informed me that he would rather have no education at all than continue under the current system. Children speak from emotion, my lord. They did not mean to be disrespectful. No." He turned to face her. "They meant every word, just as you meant every word you said to me this morning. I apologize for my presumption." "Stop apologizing," he said sharply. "You were right about all of it." The admission seemed to cost him something. His hands clenched on his knees, his jaw tight with the effort of the words. "My wife died giving birth to Henry," he continued, his voice rough. "The labor was prolonged and terrible, and I stood helpless, listening to her suffering. By the time it ended, I had lost her and gained a son who would never know his mother. I swore that day that I would make my children strong enough to survive any loss, perfect enough that the world could never break them as it had broken me. But in trying to make them invulnerable, you made them afraid," Penelope said softly. "Not of the world, but of you." "Yes." The single word held years of accumulated pain. Henry stopped speaking because nothing he said could bring his mother back. Thomas drives himself to exhaustion because he believes his worth depends on being flawless. And Sophie hides her passions because she has learned that showing interest in anything brings only criticism. He looked at her directly then, and she saw past the cold mask to the grieving man beneath. "You saw all of that in one morning. 17 governesses before you saw only difficult children and an impossible employer. But you saw their pain, and you tried to heal it. I am not qualified to heal anyone, my lord. I am scarcely governing my own situation. Which makes your compassion all the more remarkable." He paused, as if gathering courage. "Miss Crane, I want to offer you the position again, not for 1 week but permanently, with proper salary and accommodation. But this time, I ask that you teach my children not according to my specifications, but according to their needs." Penelope stared at him, certain she had misheard. "You want me to stay? More than that, I want you to help me become a better father." The admission clearly cost him. "I do not know how to love them without fear, but perhaps you can teach us all how to be human again." The carriage was warm. Outside, rain continued its relentless fall, and Penelope Margaret Crane, who had believed she had nothing left, found herself with a choice more complicated than simple employment. "I accept," she said finally, "on one condition." "Name it." "You must allow me to include you in some of the lessons. If your children are to learn freely, they need to see that their father values learning for its own sake, not merely as duty." Lord Ashcroft looked startled, then thoughtful. "Very well. Though I warn you, I am not an easy student." "I did not imagine you would be." She allowed herself a small smile. "Shall we return to the manor then? I believe we have 3 children waiting anxiously for news." The carriage turned, heading back toward Ravencross Manor. And though Penelope did not know it yet, that decision would change everything for all of them in ways both painful and profound. The children were waiting in the entrance hall when they returned, their faces pale with worry. Henry saw Penelope first and ran to her with a speed that shocked everyone present. She caught him instinctively, holding the small boy close while he buried his face in her damp cloak. "I have asked Miss Crane to remain as your governess. Lord Ashcroft announced, his voice formal but not cold. "And I have agreed to some changes in your education. Thomas, you will continue your classical studies, but may also pursue literature if you wish. Sophie, we will arrange proper instruction in botany. And Henry." He paused, his voice softening. "Henry may continue writing his stories." The three children stared at their father as if he had begun speaking a foreign language. Thomas found his voice first. "Father, do you mean it? Truly?" "I do." The Viscount moved toward them slowly, as if approaching skittish horses. "I have been too harsh, too rigid. Miss Crane has helped me see that strength comes not from denying oneself, but from understanding what makes us who we are." Sophie took a tentative step toward him. "You are not angry about my herbarium? I should like to see it, if you would show me." He looked uncomfortable with the admission, but determined. "I do not promise to understand your interest, but I promise to respect it." Henry released Penelope and turned to face his father. For a long moment, father and son simply looked at each other. Then the boy reached for his slate and wrote carefully, "I miss Mama, but I also miss you." Lord Ashcroft's composure finally cracked. He dropped to his knees before his youngest son, pulling the boy into an embrace that was fierce and desperate. "I am here," he whispered. "I am so sorry, Henry." "I am here now." Thomas and Sophie joined them, all three children clinging to their father while he held them as if they might vanish like smoke. Penelope stepped back quietly, giving them privacy for this moment they so desperately needed. Mrs. Reynolds appeared at her elbow, tears streaming down her face. "You did that," she whispered. "One morning, and you broke through 5 years of grief." "I simply spoke truth," Penelope replied. "They did the rest themselves." But watching the family embrace in the entrance hall, she felt something shift inside her chest. Purpose, perhaps, or the beginning of hope that her own losses might serve some greater good. The weeks that followed brought gradual transformation. Penelope restructured the curriculum to balance traditional requirements with the children's interests. Thomas excelled in Latin and Greek, but glowed when discussing Shakespeare and Milton. Sophie proved remarkably talented at botanical illustration, her drawings precise and beautiful. And Henry, though still silent, wrote prolifically, his stories revealing an imagination both wild and tender. Lord Ashcroft joined them for afternoon lessons 3 times per week. Penelope taught the basics of modern languages, and though she had expected him to be a difficult student, he proved surprisingly adept. His French improved rapidly. His Italian showed promise, but it was during a lesson in German that everything changed again. They were 6 weeks into her tenure when word arrived that a delegation from Prussia would be visiting Ravencross Manor. The Duke of Saxe-Weimar, an important diplomatic ally, would arrive in 3 days with his entourage. A formal dinner was planned, an opportunity for Lord Ashcroft to strengthen political relationships crucial to England's continental interests. Penelope was not, of course, expected to attend. Governesses did not dine with diplomats. But Lord Ashcroft asked her to help him prepare his remarks in German, as the Duke was known to prefer conducting important business in his native language. They worked in the library that evening after the children had retired. Penelope had prepared several standard diplomatic phrases, working through pronunciation and grammar. But she noticed Lord Ashcroft struggling more than usual, his frustration evident. "My lord," she said carefully, "are you feeling unwell? You seem more distracted than in previous lessons." He set down the paper abruptly, his expression tight. For a moment, she thought he would dismiss her question. Then, slowly, he spoke. "I cannot read properly, Miss Crane. The letters, they shift and blur. Always have. I learned to compensate, to memorize, to have secretaries prepare everything in advance. But technical discussions, diplomatic language I have not previously studied, These expose my weakness." Penelope stared at him. "You have difficulty reading? But your correspondence, your work in Parliament, all managed carefully with assistance. My late wife knew, my secretary knows, and now you know." He looked at her directly, and she saw shame mixed with defiance. "I trust you will keep this confidence." "Of course, my lord, but there are methods that can help. If we approach the material differently, if I read sections aloud and you repeat them until they become familiar, you will manage perfectly well." They worked for another 2 hours, Penelope patiently reading passages while Lord Ashcroft committed them to memory. His intelligence was formidable. What his eyes struggled to process, his mind captured and retained with remarkable precision. "You are doing excellently," she assured him as they concluded. "You will represent England brilliantly. Thanks to your assistance." He closed the book carefully. "I do not say this often enough, Miss Crane, but your presence here has been invaluable. To the children, certainly, but also to me." The words, spoken quietly in the lamplight, created an intimacy that made Penelope suddenly aware they were alone together in a way that exceeded propriety. She stood quickly. "I should retire, my lord. It grows late." "Yes." But he did not move. "Miss Crane, I want you to know that is..." He stopped, frustration crossing his features. "You have shown my family great kindness. I am grateful." "It is my position, my lord. No gratitude is necessary." But as she left the library, she felt the weight of his gaze following her, and something inside her chest tightened with an emotion she could not quite name. The evening of the diplomatic dinner arrived with unseasonable warmth. Ravenscross Manor glowed with candlelight, the state dining room prepared for formal entertainment. Penelope kept the children in the schoolroom, far from the important proceedings below, though all of them were curious about the visiting foreigners. "Father will do wonderfully," Thomas said loyally. "He always does." Sophie was less certain. "He seemed nervous this morning. I have never seen Father nervous before." Henry wrote on his slate. Miss Crane helped him practice German. He will remember everything she taught him. They were finishing their evening meal when a footman appeared at the door, breathless and urgent. "Miss Crane, His Lordship requests your presence in the state dining room immediately." Penelope set down her fork slowly. "There must be some mistake. I am not dressed for formal dinner." "His Lordship was quite insistent, miss. He said to bring you as you are." Something must be terribly wrong. Penelope followed the servant quickly, her mind racing through possibilities. Had Lord Ashcroft fallen ill? Had some diplomatic disaster occurred? The state dining room was magnificent, filled with gentlemen in evening clothes and the glittering presence of the Duke of Saxe-Weimar and his delegation. Every eye turned as Penelope entered, clearly out of place in her simple governess dress among such formal grandeur. Lord Ashcroft stood near the head of the table, his expression strained. The Duke sat to his right, speaking rapidly in German to his companions. Penelope caught only fragments, but what she heard made her blood run cold. The Duke was discussing technical matters of trade agreements, using vocabulary far beyond what she had prepared with Lord Ashcroft. And from the Viscount's frozen expression, she knew he could not follow the rapid, complex conversation. "Ah, Miss Crane," Lord Ashcroft said, his voice tight. "Please, join us. I was just telling the Duke about your remarkable facility with languages." It was not an invitation. It was a desperate plea. Penelope moved forward, her heart pounding. Every rule of propriety screamed that she should not be here, that a governess had no place at a diplomatic dinner. But Lord Ashcroft's eyes held silent desperation, and she could not abandon him. "Your Grace," she said in flawless German, curtsying to the Duke. "It is an honor to meet you. I apologize for my informal appearance. I was not expecting to join such distinguished company." The Duke's eyebrows rose. "You speak German, young lady? And quite well, I must say." "I was educated for many years in Europe, Your Grace. German was among the languages I studied." The Duke turned to Lord Ashcroft with interest. "You did not mention having such accomplished staff, my lord. Most unusual to find a woman with proper command of my language." "Miss Crane's qualifications are exceptional," Lord Ashcroft replied, his relief barely concealed. "Perhaps she might clarify some of the technical points we were discussing." For the next hour, Penelope navigated the most delicate diplomatic waters of her life. The Duke discussed trade quotas, manufacturing specifications, and complex financial arrangements, all in rapid German thick with technical terminology. Penelope listened carefully, translating when necessary, clarifying when confusion arose, and twice gently correcting misunderstandings before they became diplomatic incidents. She was acutely aware of the stares from other guests. Lord Duncan Fairweather, a neighboring aristocrat, looked scandalized. Lady Marguerite Ashford, Lord Ashcroft's sister who had arrived for the dinner, appeared shocked and disapproving. But the Duke seemed delighted. When the conversation shifted to literature, Penelope quoted Goethe in the original German. When religion arose, she referenced Luther's writings with scholarly precision. And when the Duke's aide mentioned a passage from Kant, Penelope engaged in philosophical discussion that left the Prussians clearly impressed. "Remarkable," the Duke said finally, leaning back in his chair. "Lord Ashcroft, you have secured the services of a most unusual governess. Tell me, what other languages do you command, Miss Crane?" "Italian, French, Latin, Greek, and Hebrew, Your Grace, as well as English, naturally." 7 languages? The Duke laughed with genuine pleasure. "You could serve as interpreter for half the diplomatic corps in Europe. Please demonstrate. Say something in each language." It was a test, clearly. Penelope took a breath, then spoke a simple phrase in each language, one after another. The Duke's Italian aide confirmed her accuracy. A French diplomat present nodded approval. Even the Anglican bishop attending the dinner, when she quoted scripture in both Hebrew and Greek, looked suitably impressed. "Extraordinary," the Duke declared. "Your governess, my lord, is better educated than most of my ministers. Where did you find such a treasure?" Before Lord Ashcroft could respond, Lady Marguerite stood abruptly, her face flushed with anger. "This is completely inappropriate," she announced. "A governess, interrupting formal dinner conversation, showing off like some common performer. It is beneath the dignity of this house." The room fell silent. Penelope felt humiliation burn through her. Lady Marguerite was right, of course. She had overstepped terribly, regardless of the circumstances. But Lord Duncan Fairweather, surprisingly, spoke up. "With respect, Lady Marguerite, Miss Crane prevented what could have been a significant diplomatic misunderstanding. When the Duke mentioned export restrictions, Lord Ashcroft's response, while perfectly reasonable in English, would have suggested something quite different in German. Miss Crane's intervention saved considerable awkwardness. The Duke nodded vigorously. "Indeed. Without her assistance, we might have spent weeks untangling confused negotiations. I consider her presence most fortunate." Lady Marguerite sat down stiffly, clearly outnumbered, but not appeased. "It is still highly irregular." "Perhaps," Lord Ashcroft said quietly, "but effective. Miss Crane, thank you for your assistance. You may return to the children now." Penelope curtsied and left quickly, her cheeks burning. Behind her, she heard conversation resume, but the warm approval from the Duke did nothing to offset the shame of Lady Marguerite's condemnation. Mrs. Reynolds waited in the corridor. "You were brilliant," she whispered. "Everyone is talking about it." "Everyone is talking about how I humiliated myself and embarrassed his lordship," Penelope corrected. "I should never have come down." "His lordship asked for your help. You gave it. That is nothing to be ashamed of." But shame followed Penelope back to the schoolroom, where 3 anxious children waited for news. She assured them all was well, settled them for the night, then retreated to her own small room, feeling the weight of the evening's events. She had saved Lord Ashcroft from diplomatic disaster. But at what cost to her position, her reputation, and the delicate peace they had built? The answer came the next morning when she was summoned to Lord Ashcroft's study before breakfast. He stood at the window, his back to her, tension evident in every line of his body. When he finally turned, his expression was cold and closed. The warm gratitude of recent weeks vanished completely. "You deliberately exposed me last night," he said flatly. Penelope felt the accusation like a physical blow. "My lord, I only tried to help." "Help?" His laugh was bitter. "You demonstrated to a room full of important guests that their host could not manage a diplomatic conversation without assistance from his children's governess. You made me look weak and incompetent. That was never my intention. You asked me to attend. I asked you to assist quietly, not to take over the entire conversation." He moved toward his desk, anger evident in every movement. "By morning, half of London will know that the Viscount Ashcroft requires a governess to conduct his foreign negotiations. Do you have any idea what that does to my political standing?" "I am sorry," Penelope said, her voice small. "I truly did not mean to cause harm." "Your intentions are irrelevant. The damage is done." He picked up a letter from his desk. "My sister has written to inform me that she considers your continued employment inappropriate. She suggests I have become too dependent on your presence." The words struck deeper than he probably intended. Penelope straightened her spine, gathering the tattered remains of her dignity. "Then I shall pack my belongings immediately, my lord. I apologize for any embarrassment I have caused." "No." The words stopped her at the door. "You will remain, but we will establish clear boundaries. You are a governess, Miss Crane. You teach my children. You do not involve yourself in my diplomatic affairs, my social standing, or anything beyond the schoolroom. Is that understood?" "Perfectly, my lord." "And there will be no more personal conversations, no more evening lessons in the library, no more casual interactions. You have your position because you are effective with the children. That is the extent of our relationship." Each word felt like a door closing. The discipline learned in the convent was all that prevented her from shattering the carefully constructed composure she had maintained for weeks. Penelope nodded once, not trusting her voice, and left the study before the tears could fall. She made it to her small room before breaking down completely. Not because she was losing her position, though that would have been devastating, but because for a few brief weeks she had felt like part of something, like she mattered beyond her utility. And now that illusion was shattered, revealing the harsh truth beneath. She was a servant, nothing more. The days that followed were professional and cold. Penelope taught the children with her usual care, but Lord Ashcroft no longer joined their lessons. He barely spoke to her beyond necessary instructions, his manner distant and formal. The children noticed immediately. Thomas asked if he had done something wrong. Sophie worried that her father was angry again, and Henry stopped writing his stories, returning to silent observation. A week after the disastrous dinner, Mrs. Reynolds brought concerning news. "His lordship is unwell," she told Penelope quietly. "He has not slept properly in days, and he is drinking far too much brandy in the evenings." "That is not my concern," Penelope replied, though her heart ached. "His lordship has made it clear I am to remain focused on the children. But you could help him if he would let you." "He does not want my help, Mrs. Reynolds. He wants my absence from his life beyond my contracted duties." That night, Penelope lay awake in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling and wondering how everything had gone so wrong. She had thought they were building something, not romance, certainly. That would be impossible given their positions. But perhaps friendship, or at least mutual respect. Instead, she had managed to humiliate him and destroy whatever fragile connection they had formed. The answer to how to fix it came from an unexpected source. Henry appeared at her door the next morning before breakfast, his slate covered in careful writing. "Father is not angry at you. He is afraid." The words were followed by more. "He told Thomas that he failed you, that he put you in an impossible position and then blamed you for helping him." Penelope read the message 3 times. Did your father truly say that? Henry nodded vigorously, then wrote more. He said he does not know how to apologize, so he is pretending nothing is wrong. But everything is wrong. Your father is a proud man, Henry. Apologizing is difficult for him. But I think you should talk to him anyway, Henry wrote, even if it is hard. Because silence makes everything worse. Trust me, I know. The wisdom in those words, coming from a child who had chosen silence for 5 years, struck Penelope profoundly. He spoke not merely from observation, but from the cruel geometry of shared isolation. Henry was right. Avoiding difficult conversations only allowed misunderstanding to fester. She found Lord Ashcroft in the library that evening, exactly where she expected. He looked up when she entered, surprise crossing his features. Miss Crane, is something wrong with the children? No, my lord. The children are well. But I need to speak with you, and I would appreciate if you would listen without interruption. He set down his book slowly. Very well. Penelope remained standing, her hands clasped before her. You accused me of deliberately exposing your weakness. That accusation was unfair and hurtful. I came to that dinner at your request. I assisted because you needed help, and I did my absolute best to preserve your dignity while preventing diplomatic disaster. Miss Crane, I do not think— You promise not to interrupt, my lord, she continued before her courage could fail. I understand that you were embarrassed. I understand that having to rely on a governess in front of important guests wounded your pride. But your response, which was to attack me and then shut me out completely, was not just unfair, it was cruel. Lord Ashcroft had gone very still, his expression unreadable. Furthermore, Penelope said, her voice gaining strength, your children have noticed your withdrawal. They believe they have done something wrong. Thomas is driving himself to exhaustion again. Sophie is hiding her botanical work, and Henry has stopped writing his stories. So whatever personal feelings exist between us, whatever mistakes were made, your children deserve better than to suffer for adult pride. She paused, taking a breath. I am willing to continue as governess under whatever boundaries you require, but I will not remain in a household where I am treated with contempt. And I will not watch you punish your children by withdrawing emotionally simply because you are angry with me. The silence that followed felt endless. Lord Ashcroft stood slowly, moving to the window. For a long moment, he simply stared out at the darkening gardens. You are right, he said finally, his voice rough. About all of it. Penelope said nothing, waiting. I was not angry at you, he continued. I was terrified that my weakness had been exposed, terrified that I had put you in an impossible position, and most terrified that without you, I would fail my children again. He turned to face her. So I pushed you away before you could leave of your own accord, because losing you seemed inevitable, and I wanted it to be on my terms. That is perhaps the most foolish logic I have ever heard, my lord. A ghost of a smile crossed his features. Yes, it is, but fear makes fools of us all. I have no intention of leaving, Penelope said quietly. Not unless you dismiss me. Your children need consistency. And you, if I may be so bold, need someone who will speak honestly to you rather than simply agreeing with everything you say. I do not deserve such loyalty. Perhaps not, but your children do. And I gave them my word that I would not abandon them. Lord Ashcroft crossed the room slowly, stopping a respectful distance away. I owe you an apology, Miss Crane, not just for my behavior this week, but for putting you in that situation. I should have prepared better for the Duke's visit. I should have admitted my limitations earlier. Instead, I relied on you to save me from my own inadequacy. Then, I blamed you for doing exactly that. I accept your apology, my lord, though I hope you will also apologize to your children for your recent distance. I will. Tonight. He paused, then added softly, You mentioned personal feelings. I want to be clear. Whatever emotions I may have, I would never act on them. You are in my employ. under my protection. It would be unconscionable to take advantage of that position. A sudden, sharp tension seized Penelope's chest, though she kept her expression neutral. I accept your assurance with gratitude, Julian. But I do value you, beyond the bounds of what is considered fitting for an employer. He met her eyes directly. And I would like, if possible, to return to the arrangement we had before, where we worked together for the benefit of the children, without coldness or distance. I would like that as well. They stood looking at each other in the lamplight, and Penelope felt something shift between them. Not romance, exactly. Not yet, but recognition of possibility, of potential, of something that might grow given time and proper circumstance. I should return to my room, she said finally. It grows late. Yes, good night, Miss Crane. Good night, my lord. But as she left the library, she felt his gaze following her, warm and careful, and knew that everything had changed between them, whether they acknowledged it or not. The weeks that followed brought gradual restoration of their previous ease. Lord Ashcroft resumed attending lessons, his manner toward Penelope respectful and warm. The children blossomed again, their confidence returning as their father engaged with their interests rather than simply directing them. Thomas was accepted to Cambridge for the following autumn. Sophie's botanical drawings were praised by a visiting naturalist, and Henry, in a moment of pure courage, spoke his first words in 5 years. They were reading together in the schoolroom, a quiet afternoon with rain pattering against windows. Penelope finished a chapter from Henry's favorite book about knights and dragons. As she closed the volume, she heard a voice so soft she almost missed it. "Thank you, Miss Crane." She froze, certain she had imagined it. But Henry was looking directly at her, his eyes bright with tears and triumph. "Henry?" she whispered. "Did you just speak?" He nodded, then tried again. "Thank you. For everything." Penelope pulled him into a fierce embrace, tears streaming down her face. "You spoke. Oh, Henry, you spoke." The commotion brought Thomas and Sophie running. When they realized what had happened, all 3 children were crying and laughing together. Mrs. Reynolds heard the noise and arrived to find the 4 of them in a joyous tangle of celebration. "Fetch his lordship," she commanded a passing footman. Immediately. Lord Ashcroft burst into the schoolroom moments later, his expression alarmed. "What happened? Is someone hurt?" "Papa," Henry said clearly, "I can talk again." The Viscount went completely still. Then he crossed the room in 3 strides and dropped to his knees before his youngest son, gathering the boy into his arms. "Say it again," he whispered hoarsely. "Please, Henry, say it again." "I love you, Papa. I missed talking to you." Lord Ashcroft made a sound between a laugh and a sob, holding his son as if he would never let go. Over Henry's head, his eyes found Penelope's, and the gratitude there was so profound, it took her breath away. "Miss Crane did this," he said. "She brought you back to us." "She listened," Henry replied simply, "and made me feel safe to try." That evening, after the children had retired still giddy with Henry's breakthrough, Lord Ashcroft requested Penelope join him in the library. She went nervously, uncertain what to expect. He was standing by the fire when she entered, holding something small in his hands. As she approached, he turned and extended it toward her. A small, leather-bound volume, the worn gilt edges suggesting it had been read and cherished many times. "This belonged to my wife," he said quietly. "Margaret loved poetry. She would have appreciated your methods with the children." He paused. "I want you to have it." Penelope stared at the book, understanding the significance. "My lord, I cannot accept something so personal." "Please, it is not a romantic gesture if that concerns you. It is gratitude for returning my family to me, for helping me become the father my children deserve." His eyes were serious. "You have given me back my son's voice. That is beyond any debt I could ever repay." She took the book carefully, feeling the weight of the gift. Thank you, my lord. I will treasure it. Penelope, he said softly, using her given name for the first time. I think we have moved past such formality in private, have we not? The use of her name sent warmth through her chest. Perhaps we have, Julian. They stood by the fire, the book between them, and for the first time, Penelope allowed herself to imagine a future beyond governess and employer. It seemed impossible given their circumstances. But then again, Henry speaking had seemed impossible too. Summer arrived with unexpected heat. The season had ended, meaning London society had decamped to country estates. Lady Marguerite arrived for an extended visit, her disapproval of Penelope evident in every glance. Julian, she said over breakfast one morning, I have been thinking about the children's education. Perhaps it is time to consider sending Thomas to a proper school and hiring separate masters for the younger children. Thomas will attend Cambridge in autumn, Lord Ashcroft replied. Until then, his current education is more than adequate. But is it proper, having all 3 children taught by the same governess, and such an unconventional governess at that? Miss Crane's methods are precisely what my children need. Lady Marguerite set down her teacup with unnecessary force. Your dependence on that woman is becoming scandalous, Julian. People talk. Let them talk. You cannot be so cavalier about reputation. You are a viscount. You have responsibilities. My primary responsibility is to my children's well-being. Miss Crane has provided that better than anyone else. His tone indicated the conversation was concluded. But Lady Marguerite was not finished. She cornered Penelope in the hallway later that day, her expression cold and calculating. You have positioned yourself quite cleverly, Miss Crane. From destitute nobody to indispensable member of this household. My focus is solely upon my duties to the children, my lady. I have neither the leisure nor the ambition for what you suggest. Have you? Or have you been angling for something more? She stepped closer. My brother is vulnerable, lonely, and you are conveniently available, playing the role of savior to his children. But do not delude yourself. He will never marry someone of your station. You are a governess, nothing more. The words should not have hurt because they were true, but they struck deep nonetheless. I have no designs on your brother, my lady. I am here for the children. Then you will not object to leaving once Thomas departs for university. Surely he is your primary pupil. That decision rests with Lord Ashcroft, not me. We shall see. Lady Marguerite smiled coldly. I have considerable influence with my brother, and I believe it is time for changes in this household. The threat hung in the air between them. Penelope excused herself as soon as politely possible, her mind racing. She had been foolish to imagine any future beyond her current position. Lady Marguerite was right. Governesses did not marry viscounts. Such things happened in novels, not reality. That evening she found Julian in the garden, walking alone in the twilight. He saw her approaching and smiled, that warm expression that made her heart do complicated things. Penelope, I was hoping to see you. I wanted to discuss next term's curriculum. Actually, I need to speak with you about something else. She took a breath. Your sister believes I should leave once Thomas departs for university. Perhaps she is right. Julian's expression darkened. My sister expressed that opinion to you directly? She is concerned about propriety and your reputation. Those are valid concerns. What my sister is concerned about is control. He moved closer. Penelope, look at me. Do you want to leave? What I want is irrelevant. It is the only thing that matters. He reached for her hand, then stopped himself, remembering propriety. I am going to ask you something, and I want complete honesty. Has my regard for you become inappropriate? Have I made you uncomfortable? No. You have been nothing but respectful. But you are aware that my feelings exceed those appropriate for an employer? Her heart pounded. I may have noticed certain indications, yes. And your feelings? This was dangerous territory. Admitting the truth could destroy everything. But lying felt impossible. "I care for you," she said quietly. "Far more than is wise, but I am also realistic about my position. I am a governess, Julian. You are a viscount. Whatever we feel, it cannot change those facts." "Cannot?" He smiled slightly. "Or should not?" "Both. Your sister is right. Marrying me would be scandalous. It would affect your political standing, your children's prospects, everything you have worked to build." "Let me tell you what would truly be scandalous," he said softly. "Sending away the woman my children love because society expects me to marry within my class. Prioritizing political advantage over genuine connection. Living the rest of my life according to others' expectations rather than my own heart." "Julian, you cannot be serious." "I have never been more serious." He looked at her directly. "I love you, Penelope. Not despite your circumstances, but because of who you are. Your intelligence, your compassion, your courage. You make me want to be better. You make my children better. And I am tired of pretending that is not valuable beyond measure. Love is not enough. The practical realities can be managed. Yes, there will be talk. Some doors will close, but I have political allies who value merit over lineage. And I have 3 children who would be heartbroken to lose you." He paused. "But I will not force this. If you do not feel the same, or if you cannot accept the difficulties a marriage would bring, I understand. You have my word that your position here is secure regardless." Penelope felt tears prick her eyes. Everything she had learned about her place in the world screamed that this was impossible. But looking at Julian's earnest face, remembering Henry's breakthrough and Sophie's joy and Thomas's growing confidence, she wondered if perhaps the rules were not as absolute as she had believed. "I do love you," she whispered, "but I am terrified." "So am I," he smiled, "but we have faced worse together. What is a little scandal compared to bringing a silent child back to speech?" Despite her fear, she laughed. "You make it sound simple." "It is not simple, but it is right." He extended his hand properly this time. "Will you consider it? No immediate answer required. Just consider the possibility." She took his hand, feeling the warmth of his touch through their gloves. "I will consider it." But considering and deciding proved to be 2 very different things. The next weeks were complicated by Lady Marguerite's increasing hostility. She made pointed comments at every meal, invited eligible ladies to visit, and generally made her disapproval evident. The children noticed and circled Penelope with fierce allegiance. "Aunt Marguerite is being most disagreeable," Sophie declared. "I do not understand why she dislikes you so much." "She believes I have overstepped my position, which is perhaps true." "That is ridiculous," Thomas said. "You saved this family. Anyone with eyes can see that." Even Henry contributed his opinion. "Father loves you," he said simply. "Why is that unsuitable?" "Because society says so," Penelope thought. "Because I am nobody, and he is somebody. Because fairy tales do not happen to disgraced solicitors' daughters." But she did not say any of that to the children. The crisis came on a sweltering August afternoon. Lord Ashcroft had travelled to London for parliamentary business, leaving Penelope to manage the household in his absence. Lady Marguerite chose that opportunity to strike. She arrived at the schoolroom during lessons, accompanied by Mrs. Beatrice Thornton, a severe woman Penelope recognized as the proprietress of a prestigious school for young ladies. "Miss Crane," Lady Marguerite announced, "I have arranged for Mrs. Thornton to evaluate Sophie. I believe she would benefit from proper schooling rather than your unconventional methods." Sophie's face went pale. "Aunt Marguerite, Father did not mention any school." "Your father has been too lenient. Mrs. Thornton will provide the discipline and proper training you require." Penelope stood carefully. "Lady Marguerite, I must object. Sophie is thriving under the current arrangement, and Lord Ashcroft should be consulted before any such decision. My brother has delegated household management to me during his absence. I am perfectly within my rights." Mrs. Thornton moved to Sophie's desk, examining her work with a critical eye. "Botanical drawings," she said with disapproval. "Hardly appropriate subjects for a young lady. She should be working on decorative watercolors, not scientific illustrations." "Sophie has real talent for botanical art," Penelope protested. "It is both academically valuable and personally fulfilling." "It is inappropriate." Mrs. Thornton turned to Lady Marguerite. "I agree, the child requires proper schooling. My institution would correct these irregular inclinations." Sophie burst into tears. Thomas stood protectively beside his sister. Even Henry looked ready to fight, his small hands clenched into fists. "You cannot take her," Thomas said. "Father would never allow it." "Your father is not here," Lady Marguerite replied coldly. "And this household requires structure that Miss Crane has failed to provide." Penelope felt fury rise like a tide. Everything she had built, every careful victory, was being dismantled by a bitter woman who valued conformity over compassion. "You may have authority in Lord Ashcroft's absence," she said, her voice shaking with suppressed anger. "But you do not have the right to traumatize children to make a point about propriety. Sophie will not be going anywhere until her father returns and makes that decision himself." "You forget your place, Miss Crane." "No, I know my place exactly. It is here, protecting these children from people who would crush their spirits in the name of respectability." Lady Marguerite's face flushed. "You are dismissed, effective immediately. Pack your belongings and leave this house." "You cannot dismiss me. Only Lord Ashcroft has that authority. I am acting on his behalf. Then he can confirm your decision when he returns tomorrow." Penelope moved to stand between Mrs. Thornton and the children. "Until then, these children remain in my care." The standoff lasted only moments before Mrs. Thornton, uncomfortable with the confrontation, made her excuses and departed. Lady Marguerite glared at Penelope with pure hatred. "My brother has been bewitched by you, but I will make him see reason. You are poison in this household." She swept from the room, leaving Penelope trembling with reaction. The children clustered around her, all three speaking at once. "You were so brave," Sophie sobbed. "Father will not let her send you away," Thomas insisted. Henry simply held her hand tightly, his expression fierce. But Penelope was not certain. Lady Marguerite had been right about one thing. Penelope's position in the household had become untenable. Either she left or she stayed in a way that was proper and permanent. Lord Ashcroft returned the following afternoon to find his household in chaos. Lady Marguerite met him in the entrance hall with her version of events, painting Penelope as insubordinate and manipulative. Before she could finish, all three children appeared, talking over each other to defend their governess. "Enough," Julian said firmly. "Everyone to the library, now." They assembled in tense silence. Julian listened to each version of events carefully, his expression unreadable. When everyone had spoken, he stood and moved to the window, his back to them all. "Marguerite," he said finally, "you overstepped badly. These are my children, and decisions about their education rest solely with me. I was trying to protect them from improper influence. You were trying to punish Miss Crane for perceived sins that exist only in your imagination." He turned to face her. "I love her, Marguerite. I intend to ask her to marry me. If that displeases you, I am sorry, but it will not change my decision." Lady Marguerite gasped. The children erupted in excited exclamations, and Penelope felt the room spin around her. "Julian, you cannot," she managed to say. "I can," he replied firmly. "And I will, unless you refuse me." He crossed to stand before her. "Penelope Margaret Crane, will you marry me?" "This is insane," Lady Marguerite protested. "Father, yes," Sophie cried. "Say yes," Henry urged. Penelope looked at Julian's face, saw the absolute certainty there, and felt something inside her shift. All her life, she had been told what was possible and what was not, who she could be and who she could never become. But this man, this impossible man, was offering her a choice she had never dared imagine. "Yes," she whispered, despite every reasonable objection and practical concern, yes. Julian's face transformed with joy. He took her hand, properly this time, and brought it to his lips in a gesture witnessed by his scandalized sister and delighted children. "God be thanked," he murmured. "I was prepared to be exceedingly dramatic if you had refused." Lady Marguerite fled the room in outrage. The children celebrated with unrestrained enthusiasm. And Penelope, standing in the library where she had first felt the stirrings of hope, allowed herself to believe that sometimes, just sometimes, impossible things happened after all. The next months were not easy. Society reacted with predictable scandal when Lord Ashcroft announced his engagement to his children's governess. Invitations dried up. Political allies distanced themselves. Lady Marguerite refused to attend the wedding. But other things happened too. The Duke of Saxe-Weimar sent congratulations and a generous gift, praising Penelope's linguistic accomplishments. Several progressive members of Parliament expressed support, and most importantly, the children glowed with happiness at the prospect of making their beloved governess officially part of the family. They married in October, a small ceremony in the parish church with only close friends attending. Thomas served as groomsman. Sophie and Henry stood as witnesses. And when Julian promised to love and cherish Penelope all the days of his life, there was not a dry eye in the congregation. The years that followed brought challenges and triumphs in equal measure. Some doors closed, but others opened. Julian's political career shifted focus toward educational reform, where Penelope's insights proved invaluable. Thomas thrived at Cambridge. Sophie pursued botanical studies with determination. And Henry, who had found his voice, discovered a calling toward ministry. 8 years after that rainy morning when Penelope first arrived at Ravenscross Manor, the family gathered for Christmas. Thomas, now 22 and managing the estates, had brought his new wife. Sophie, 19 and recently married to a botanist who appreciated her mind as much as her beauty, glowed with contentment. Henry, 16 and preparing for ordination, read scripture at dinner with a voice clear and strong. 2 additional children had joined the family. Margaret, 6 years old and already showing her mother's linguistic gifts, and little Julian, 4, who collected beetles and asked endless questions about everything. They gathered in the drawing room after dinner, a portrait of hard-won happiness. Julian held his wife's hand, a gesture that had once seemed impossible, now natural and right. "I have been thinking," Thomas said, addressing Penelope, "about what you taught us, about courage and honesty and refusing to be diminished by circumstances." "I did not teach you that," Penelope replied gently. "I simply reminded you of what was already inside you." "You taught me that intelligence without compassion is worthless," Sophie added, "and that true ladies can pursue science without being less feminine." Henry smiled. "You taught me that silence might feel safe, but finding my voice was worth the risk." Julian squeezed Penelope's hand. "And you taught me that vulnerability, when offered honestly and within appropriate bounds, is strength rather than weakness." Penelope looked around at the family she had never expected to have. Not perfect, certainly. Still navigating society's judgments and the ongoing challenges of their unconventional union. But real, loving, complete. "You all taught me something far more valuable," she said softly. "You taught me that worth is not determined by circumstances or position. That education and accomplishment are valuable, but compassion and courage are what truly transform lives. And that love, genuine love expressed with both passion and propriety, can survive anything society throws at it." Little Margaret tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Mama, tell the story again. about how you and Papa fell in love." "Which account of it?" Julian asked, his eyes twinkling. "The proper one or the truth?" "The true account," all three older children said in unison. So Penelope told the story once more, about a desperate governess and a grieving widower, about 3 wounded children and 1 honest conversation, about diplomatic dinners and botanical drawings and a boy who learned to speak again. "And the moral?" little Julian asked when she finished. "The moral," Penelope said, looking at her husband, "is that sometimes the rules we think are absolute are merely suggestions, that proper and genuine need not be opposites, and that the most impossible love stories are often the truest." Outside, snow began to fall softly over Ravencross Manor. Inside, a family born from loss and built on courage celebrated the greatest triumph of all. Not perfection, but persistent, imperfect, thoroughly human love. Thank you so much for staying with us until the end. If this story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps us continue creating stories of love, courage, and hope that remind us all that change is always possible.